I had just finished putting on my earrings when she grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not rough, but firm enough that I stopped moving. My neighbor. She has lived 3 houses down from me for 22 years. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not in all that time, and I have seen her through a lot. Through her husband's passing, through her hip replacement, through the year her youngest son didn't speak to her. I know her face. This was not a face I recognized. "Don't go in yet," she whispered. "I need you to hear something first." I almost laughed. I thought she was being dramatic. She has a flair for it, always has. But she wasn't smiling. She was standing in the hallway outside my own dining room, pressing herself flat against the wall like she was afraid someone on the other side of it might hear her breathe. So I stopped laughing before I even started. I pressed myself against the wall beside her, and I listened. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the context, and I've learned at 63 years old that context is everything. My husband passed 4 years ago. Cardiac event. Fast, the doctors told me. Merciful, some people said, which is a word I've never quite forgiven them for. There was nothing merciful about coming home to find him on the kitchen floor next to a bag of groceries he'd just brought in. He had bought oranges. I don't know why I remember that. The oranges were still in the bag. We had been married for 38 years. He left me the house, the savings, and a portfolio that his brother, a financial advisor, had helped him build over 3 decades. It wasn't extraordinary wealth, but it was more than most. Enough that I didn't have to worry. Enough that I could breathe. He also left me our son. Our son is 34 now. He went to school in Colorado, stayed there, built a life. He calls on Sundays, sometimes Saturdays, if something interesting happened during the week. He is steady and kind, and he sounds like his father when he laughs. I am proud of him in a way that I cannot always find words for. And he left me our daughter. She is 31. She lives 40 minutes away, which means I see her often. Or I used to. In the years after her father died, she came around less. I told myself it was grief. Everyone handles it differently. I told myself she was busy. She had just gotten serious with someone, a man she'd met through a mutual friend, and new relationships take time and attention. I understood that. I made excuses for her the way mothers do. Looking back, I think I always knew something was off. There would be small moments, a question about the house that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation, a comment about my investments that she shouldn't have known enough to make. Once, she asked me whether I'd updated my will since her father died. I told her I had. She asked who the executor was. I said my attorney. She nodded and changed the subject, and I filed the whole thing away under nothing because I didn't want it to be something. Her boyfriend, I'll call him what he was polished, the kind of polished that takes effort. He always brought wine when he came for dinner. He always held the door. He called me by my first name after I asked him to, which I thought was respectful, and he laughed at my jokes, which I thought was genuine. I am not a foolish woman. I want that on the record. But I was a grieving one, and grief does something to your judgment. It softens the edges of your suspicion. It makes you want the people around you to be good, because you have already lost so much, and the idea of losing more. The idea that the loss doesn't stop, that it keeps reshaping itself into new forms, is too much to hold. So I held wine glasses and made pasta and told myself my daughter had found someone worthy of her. The dinner party was my idea. I want to own that. It was June, and the garden was finally looking the way I'd always wanted it to. The hydrangeas had come in thick and blue. The roses were climbing the trellis the way my husband had always said they would if I was patient enough. He was right. He was right about a lot of things. I wanted to share it. I invited my neighbor, a couple from my book club, my daughter and her boyfriend, and my son, who had driven down from Colorado for the long weekend. It was meant to be simple. Good food, good company. The garden lit up in the early evening. Nothing more than that. I had spent the afternoon in the kitchen. My neighbor had come over early to help, the way she always does. She knows where everything is in my kitchen better than some people know their own homes. We have that kind of friendship, the kind built in slow, ordinary increments over 22 years. She knows which drawer has the good scissors and which burner runs hot, and that I always undersalt the pasta water on the first pour. My daughter and her boyfriend arrived first. They were early, which surprised me. She is never early. I came out of the kitchen to greet them, and she hugged me briefly, the way you hug someone you're performing affection for rather than actually feeling it. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I went back to the kitchen. At some point, while I was in the kitchen and my son had stepped outside with the couple from book club to look at the garden, my daughter and her boyfriend went into the study. My study. The room where I keep the filing cabinet, where I keep the filing cabinet, where I keep the folder with my financial documents, where my husband's old desk still sits because I cannot bring myself to move it. I didn't know this at the time. I found out later. But my neighbor knew. She had stepped into the hallway to get something from her coat pocket, and she saw them slip through the study door. She didn't say anything right away. She told me later she wasn't sure what she was seeing. She thought maybe my daughter had wanted to show her boyfriend a photograph or something harmless. She thought maybe she was overthinking it. She stood in the hallway. She waited, and through the closed study door, she heard them talking. She didn't tell me right away. She came back into the kitchen. She helped me plate the salads. She laughed at the right moments through dinner. She watched my daughter across the table with eyes that I now understand were working very hard. She told me after the couple from book club had gone home, after my son had gone upstairs to the guest room, after my daughter and her boyfriend had hugged goodbye in the front doorway and she had said, "Lovely dinner, Mom," in that performance voice, and driven away. After all of that, my neighbor sat down at my kitchen table and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I sat down across from her. She told me what she had heard. My daughter had been looking through the filing cabinet. That was the first thing. She had been looking through it, and her boyfriend had been standing at the door, keeping watch, my neighbor said, and her daughter had found something, a folder, and she'd said, "This is the one. This is the account." And her boyfriend had said, "How much?" And my daughter, who I pushed a stroller with through every season of her childhood, who I sat up with when she had ear infections at 2 years old, who I drove to every school play and every orthodontist appointment, and whose college application essays I read 40 times. My daughter had said a number. My neighbor told me the number. It was not a number my daughter should have known. It was the balance of an account that had never been discussed at the dinner table. It was private. It had been private for 38 years. Her boyfriend said, "That's more than I thought." My daughter said, "It's enough. We don't need to push the timeline." He said, "Are you sure she won't?" My daughter said, "She won't figure it out. She never asks enough questions." I sat at the kitchen table and my neighbor held both my hands in hers and I just sat there. I couldn't locate any of the things I expected to feel. The anger wasn't there yet. The grief wasn't there. What was there was a kind of white humming stillness. Like the moment after a car accident when you're sitting on the side of the road and you're not sure yet what's broken. "I know this is a lot," my neighbor said. "Say it again," I said. The last thing she said. My neighbor looked at me carefully. "She won't figure it out. She never asks enough questions." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. My neighbor waited for more. There wasn't more. Not that night. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark in the bedroom I had shared with my husband for 38 years, and I stared at the ceiling, and I went back through every conversation I had with my daughter in the last 2 years. I sorted through them the way you sort through a drawer that's become cluttered, looking for what belongs and what doesn't, what fits and what was planted there. The questions about the will, the questions about the executor, the casual comments about the house. "You really don't need this much space, Mom," that I had interpreted as concern. The dinner she'd organized 6 months ago with her boyfriend's parents, where someone had brought up long-term care facilities in a way that was meant to sound offhand, but now felt choreographed. I am 63 years old. I am not infirm. I am not confused. I go to yoga on Tuesday mornings and I read 2 books a month and I beat my son at Scrabble with regularity. The idea that my own daughter, had looked at me and seen someone who could be managed rather than someone who was present and sharp and very much here. I stopped that thought. I filed it. I would come back to it later. The first thing I did in the morning, before coffee, was call my attorney. Her name is not Patricia. I want to be clear about that. She has been my attorney for 11 years, and she is meticulous and dry-humored, and she does not soften things for the sake of comfort, which is exactly what I needed that morning. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When did you last have your estate documents reviewed?" I said, "When my husband passed." She said, "We need to meet this week." She had 3 observations. The first was that a revocable living trust, which I didn't have, would make it significantly harder for anyone to contest or maneuver around my estate wishes. It would also remove the probate process, which is where most of the vulnerability lies. The second was that whoever had accessed my filing cabinet had likely been looking for documentation that would help them understand my assets before I was gone. "This is not illegal," she said, "but it is a signal." She used the word signal carefully. The third was that she had seen this before. More than once. She said it without judgment, but also without cushioning it. She said, "It is not always the people you would expect." I asked her what I should do. She said, "First, protect what's yours, then decide what you want to do about your daughter." She was right to separate those things. They are separate things. I spent 2 weeks working through the paperwork with her. We restructured. We clarified. We made it significantly more difficult for anyone to do anything with my estate without my active, conscious participation. My son was the only one I called during that time. I told him what had happened on a Tuesday night, and he was quiet for so long that I asked if he was still there. He said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." I said, "Don't be sorry. I need you to be clear-headed." He said, "Okay." And then he was. That is my son. He has always been able to follow my lead when I ask him to. I did not call my daughter. I waited. I went about my life. I watered the hydrangeas and went to yoga and returned library books and made soup from scratch on a Sunday afternoon. I behaved like a woman who had no idea what she knew. I am not sure what that says about me. I think it says I had learned, over 63 years, that sometimes you need to hold what you know quietly, like an ember, and let it stay warm while you decide what to do with it. She called me 3 weeks later. Casual, chatty. She mentioned something about a trip she and her boyfriend were planning. She mentioned, carefully, gently, in the way she had learned to slide things into conversation, that she'd been thinking about my financial situation and whether I was working with someone trustworthy. "I just worry," she said. "You know, after everything with Dad." "I have a very good attorney," I said. "I've recently updated everything, actually." There was a pause. Brief, but I heard it. "Oh," she said. "Good. That's good." I let the silence sit for a moment. "Would you like to come for dinner this week?" I asked. "Just the 2 of us." She said yes. She arrived on a Thursday evening. Her boyfriend was not with her, which I had asked, and she had seemed slightly uneasy about the request, but not uneasy enough to say no. I had made her favorite. Roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, the recipe her father had used before I inherited it from him. I had set the table with the good tablecloth. I had opened a bottle of wine. I had done all the things that said, "This is a normal dinner. Everything is fine. Your mother loves you," because I do love her. That is the part of all of this that I cannot wrap up cleanly. She is my daughter. I held her in a hospital room 31 years ago, and I have carried her in the way that you carry a child, even after they are grown, somewhere between the ribs, not always comfortable, but permanent. We ate, We talked about small things, the garden, her work, a show she'd been watching. After dinner, when we were sitting with our wine, I said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me. "I know about the filing cabinet," I said. The color went out of her face. I watched it happen. It was like watching someone blow out a candle. The light just gone. "Mom, let me finish," I said. "I'm going to say what I have to say, and then you can say whatever you need to." She closed her mouth. I told her what I knew. I told her I knew she had been in the study. I told her I knew what she and her boyfriend had said. I did not tell her it was my neighbor who had heard them. I protected that. She didn't need to know which direction it had come from. I told her what I had done. The restructuring, the trust, the new documentation. I told her it was handled, and that nothing she or her boyfriend might have been planning was possible anymore. I told her that the thing that had broken my heart, not the thing that had made me angry, the thing that had broken my heart was not the money. It was the sentence. She never asks enough questions. That I had been reduced in her mind to someone manageable, someone who could be stepped around. I told her that her father would have been devastated. She started crying before I finished. Not the crying of someone performing remorse. I know the difference by now. But the kind that comes from somewhere real, ugly and sudden, the way real grief tends to be. "I don't even know how it started," she said. It was so gradual. He would say things about how you had more than you needed, about how it was just going to sit there, about how we could do so much more with it than it was doing." I said, "He." She said, "He." I said, "And what do you think about that now that you're sitting here saying it out loud?" She didn't have an answer right away. We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that is doing work, that is not comfortable but is necessary. Finally, she said, "I think I let someone I was in love with turn me into a person I don't recognize." I didn't say anything to that. I let her sit with it. She ended the relationship 2 months later. She called me on a Sunday morning. She knew I'd be awake. I am always awake early. And she told me it was done. She didn't give me details and I didn't ask for them. I just said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I will be." I said, "Yes, you will be." I said, "Yes, you will." We are not all the way back to where we were. I would be lying to you if I said we were. There is something between us now, not a wall but a seam. The kind you can feel when you run your hand along it, even when you can't see it anymore. We are repairing it, slowly, the way the roses came up the trellis. Not fast, but real. She has apologized, multiple times in different ways, which tells me she is not checking a box but actually working through it. I have accepted those apologies. The accepting of an apology, I have learned, is not the same as the forgetting. You can hold both. You can say "I forgive you" and also carry the memory of what was said in a dark hallway, of a number spoken like it was inventory, of a daughter who looked at her mother and did not see her mother. I see her though, I always have. My neighbor came for coffee last week. She does, most weeks. We sat in the kitchen, and she told me about her granddaughter's soccer tournament, and I told her the lavender I planted in the spring was finally filling in. Normal things. The kinds of things that make up a life. Before she left, she said, "You know I was scared to tell you." I said, "I know." She said, "I didn't know if you'd believe me, or if it would, I didn't know what it would do." I reached across and put my hand on her arm. "It gave me back my own eyes," I said. "That's what it did." She nodded. She looked out the kitchen window at the garden. "The hydrangeas are still going," she said. "They are," I said. "My husband always said they were tougher than they looked." She smiled. "He was usually right." "He was," I said, "about most things." I walked her to the door. She hugged me on the porch the way old friends do, without ceremony, without words. Just the plain warmth of someone who has known you long enough to not need to explain anything. I watched her walk back down the street toward her house. Then I went inside and started on dinner. My son is visiting this weekend. He is bringing his partner who I like very much. She makes him laugh and she argues with him about baseball, and she remembered my birthday without being reminded. which tells me everything I need to know about a person. I am making the roasted chicken again. I have already started the marinade. The trust is filed. The documents are in order. The account is in my name, and my name alone, with provisions I understand and control completely. My attorney calls it clean. I call it mine. I am 63 years old, and I am standing in my kitchen, and the garden is outside the window, and the roses are still on the trellis where my husband said they'd be if I was patient enough. He was right. I am still here. I ask enough questions. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to be blindsided by someone you love. People talk about betrayal like it arrives with a warning. Like there's a moment where you can brace yourself, where your instincts kick in and you step back before the fall. In my experience, that's not how it works. The betrayal I lived through came wrapped in roast chicken and garden hydrangeas and a bottle of wine someone brought to look generous. It came on a warm June evening when the roses were finally doing what my husband said they would, and I was happy, genuinely, quietly happy, for the first time in a long time. And I think that's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it. Not the anger, the timing. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it, is that what my daughter did was not only a choice she made, it was a series of small choices, each one building on the last, each one made easier by the one before it. That's how people drift. Not in one dramatic leap, but in increments so small they barely feel like movement at all. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who looked through her mother's filing cabinet. She got there step by step, through conversations with someone who had learned to reframe her thinking, to make the wrong thing feel reasonable, even logical. That doesn't excuse it. I want to be clear about that. But it does explain it. And for me, understanding the difference between an excuse and an explanation has been one of the harder things I've had to learn in my life. My neighbor, that steady, ordinary presence 3 houses down, she made a choice too. She could have walked back into the kitchen and told herself she hadn't heard clearly, or that it wasn't her business, or that saying something would only cause pain. Those would have been easy thoughts to have. Instead, she stood in that hallway and she held what she knew, and then she sat across from me at my kitchen table and she said, "I need you to let me finish before you say anything." That took something. I know it did. I don't take it lightly. I've been thinking about what it costs to be honest with someone you care about. Really honest, not the careful kind where you shape the truth until it doesn't bruise anything. The full kind. It costs comfort. It costs certainty about how the other person will react. It costs the version of your friendship where everything is easy and no one has had to be brave. She paid all of that, and she paid it for me, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. The intelligence it took to handle those weeks, the meetings with my attorney, the restructuring, the waiting, none of that came from being exceptional. It came from a choice I made at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I decided to think clearly instead of reactively. I decided to protect myself before I confronted anyone. That sequence mattered. If I had called my daughter that same night, furious, without anything in order, the outcome would have been different. Messier. Less mine. There is something worth saying about the kind of strength it takes to hold still when every instinct tells you to move. To sit with information and not act on it immediately. To let the anger exist somewhere in your chest without letting it drive the car. I didn't know I had that in me until I needed it. My daughter is rebuilding herself. I'm watching that happen and I'm letting it happen, which is its own kind of patience. She made choices that cost both of us something real, but she also recognized them for what they were eventually, and she chose differently. That matters. I believe in the weight of a changed choice. I am still here, and I ask enough questions now.